right, so those motions pass. Thank you, Mr. Nastandi. Mr. Storm, did you, you were interrupted in your presentation. Did you want to continue? Or?
That's okay.
Okay.
If you want to segue to
the questions.
that's
okay. Fine. All right. Mr. Chavez, I know you have a commitment also. Did you want to weigh in on this? Okay. On this issue, any? Okay. Well, I would like to address this. My main concern is I understand that that campuses felt compelled to impose these student fees during the recession to make up for the lost state revenues, but now we're at a point where we're talking about increasing state funding, and the Assembly, and in particular, the Assembly leadership, is discussing, exploring the restoration of state funding above and beyond what the governor has proposed in the in his January budget proposal. So in that context, I want to raise serious concerns about these campus student fees. They've been called not only by me and members of the legislature, but by editorial boards statewide. I know I've seen editorials in the Los Angeles Times and the Sacramento Bee and others as essentially a broken promise to freeze tuitions if the state were to start restoring funding for the Cal State University. So I would like to send a strong signal, and I've personally conveyed this to CSU Chancellor White, that I, speaking for myself, am very concerned about these campus fees for many of the reasons articulated by the LAO. But most significantly, we are promising Californians that in exchange for increasing and reversing this long-term trend in declining state support for public higher education, that we are to freeze student tuitions, because the students have been their tuitions have gone up by I believe 97% during the recession, and that is the promise that I believe the CSU made to the governor, and so these campus fees seem to be an end run around that promise. That is my opinion. I'd like to give you, Mr. Storm, any opportunity for a response.
Well, I think we'll just have to have a difference of opinion. I think the freeze has been placed on the Board of Trustees and the chancellors not to inflate the tuition fees. I think what you're seeing here, though, when you mention newspaper articles and editorial boards, the one thing that's lost here is the people who actually live and breathe this on a daily basis, which are the students, the faculty, the administration, wanting to have, as students, an education that is robust, of quality, of good experience, faculty wanting to have the resources and the ability to deliver students and provide the students a good education. Those are the ones at these particular campuses that are electing to say, we hear you, but we can't live like this anymore from their campus perspective. I want to flip that around, though, and say that there are also equally number of campuses that have said, we are not establishing these at this time. One of those being San Francisco State University. They've not elected to create one of these. So it is a self-determined situation on a campus-by-campus basis. And I think we're just going to have to agree to disagree. I will say, though, on one very strong point that you made, is that with the restoration of more state general fund, I think that there is going to be less of a tendency for campuses to go this route. I cannot guarantee it 100% by that, but I can say that with more general fund coming in to the state or to CSU, and more resources that are available to hire tenure-track faculty, to restore advising services, both mental and academic, to do a number of those core functions that are necessary on each and every campus, I think you're going to see a much better situation if the state is able to continue down that path of restoring more and more funding.
Mr. Ting.
In the 11 circumstances where you raise fees, did you get feedback in any of those instances from the students who are paying the fees, by the way? I think it's really easy for the administration and faculty to say, hey, we can't stand this anymore, and ask somebody else to pay for it. So in those 11 circumstances, did you get any feedback that the students didn't want that increase?
There's feedback on both sides on all of these situations. There are students that are saying that they are adamantly against, and there are others that are adamantly for. It's all on a case-by-case basis and down in the so-called weeds of the details of each and every campus.
So I think, I really can't understand how we are going to disagree on the fact that there was a broken promise, because students had to pay more to go to these 11 institutions. I mean, it sounds like sort of a very insincere promise, especially in a time when fees, it wasn't that fees were frozen during this time, fees did go up during this time. And I think it creates an extraordinarily unfair playing field. I mean, San Francisco State's got to be, if not the most expensive or one of the most expensive places to operate a campus, yet they've somehow found a way. And I haven't talked to our president to understand how they've done it or what circumstances they've been able to backfill that money. While I am, sympathetic to operating a business, it's very, very clear to me, and especially your inability to really detail a very good methodology and how you got input, whether how seriously that input was taken, or really whether these 11 campuses sort of just ran roughshod over that student input, that it absolutely was a broken promise to it wasn't just a matter of increasing fees, but really directly increasing costs. It wasn't just like, don't increase tuition, but we're going to have all these other fees, all these really hidden fees that are going to really increase the student costs. I find it fairly shocking that you can come forward to this committee and sort of say that. And it really calls into the question, really, the overall judgment of the entire CSU and how they can continue to, frankly, allow this to happen and not have a sunset provision, not have a provision down the road that says, hey, we understand that we took a lot of cuts, but hey, if we get this money added back, then we can take those fees. It just seems like this is just the beginning. The beginning of the constant independent fee increase on their own, and frankly, the circumvention around the will of the legislature, or even to have that dialogue. It's fairly surprising, frankly.
Well, one other thing I want to add on this, and I failed to mention this at the beginning of my opening statements, but you all have serious concerns about this, obviously. The one thing that we also have on those campuses is that same issue. Our presidents, our faculty don't want to see fees go up. It creates access problems. It's no good across the board, right? And we all know that. But it takes money to run the university, and it's gotten to that point in some campuses, even with the situation of not wanting to raise fees as being an end to a mean on these student success fees. There is a lot of challenge in that, and there's a lot of challenge from our presidents, from our faculty, from our students to even go down that road. It's a big, sensitive issue, right? They don't want to see that go up as well. But there is kind of a point at which each and every campus has to make that tough call, and many of them have, unfortunately. but they have.
But it goes back to the goal of the university isn't just to turn the lights on every morning, right? If you look at and tie back to the absolutely abysmal graduation rates for 4 years, for 6 years, I mean, the university's mission is to educate these students and frankly, to graduate these students in a timely fashion. It's not just to exist. So, I mean, if there was some justification and these fees somehow helped improve graduation or improved access or improved, but it doesn't really seem to have that correlation. It just seems, again, I don't see, I haven't seen the specific justification, specific methodology. I mean, it just seems sort of like, hey, we needed the money, we pick this number, and obviously I'm sure there's more background to each of these, but and we talked to a few students, but hey, we had to make a decision because the lights had to get turned on, right? So.
I think one way to really understand this a lot better, and Assemblymember Ting, I can meet with your staff or you personally if you'd like to about this, but actually look, and this is not the arena by which we could do this. But walking through exactly what is being budgeted with the proceeds of these student success fees, you will see very clearly, rather than talking about it from a kind of conceptual development basis, but when the rubber meets the road, what does that money buy those campuses? And you'll see very clearly there's some really key, both fundamental things, but also, there are some real kind of quality issues too. And I'm just offering that as an opportunity.
Happy to, always welcome to have the discussion, but it's not just what the money buys, but what does the money result in?
All right.
Because at the end of the day, at the end of the day, it's about results.
Okay. Why don't we open it up for public comments?
Hi, my name is Sarah Couch, president of the California State Student Association, and I represent the 23 campuses of the CSU. I served for 2 years on our Student Fee Advisory Committee, which oversaw at the time the alternative consultation process for the mental or the health services fee, as well as the most recent one for the event center on campus. So I have experience in this. But speaking, and I can answer questions about that if you'd like, but I'm speaking about on a general discussion that I know that we were talking about the articles about students criticizing the fee. I'd like to talk about what happened at our most recent meeting, that we had a thoughtful discussion about student success fees in April, and every campus had the opportunity to talk about their process and what they thought about the fees themselves. Believe me, CSSA is not an advocate for increasing the higher tuition or increasing fees, but all campuses agreed that we should continue to follow the current policy that stipulates that there is a student fee advisory committee and that it be made up of a majority of students that was mentioned earlier. They also agreed that there need to be as much publicity as possible about the fees, with multiple opportunities for students to weigh in and express their opinion, one, about the fee, and two, about what it should go toward. And I think a prime exemplar of that was at San Diego State, where they worked as a community to develop what actually should be in that student success fee. And from their conversations, they developed it, and then the amount as well. However, what I found most striking about the conversations that we had from a number of different campuses is that they said that they no longer believed that the state was going to provide the funding that they needed for their campuses in order to offer enough classes, provide appropriate counseling and financial aid advising, or keep their libraries open late during finals. So these students were willing to tax themselves instead to ensure that the quality of their education was maintained. And as you've seen, that they've done it on 11 campuses. Also, I wanted to make mention during these forums that were happening, there were polls going on during them as well. Two examples. One as at San Diego State, when they polled students, it was 64% of students wanted to move forward with the fee. Also at San Bernardino, it was 71% wanted to move forward with the fee, and I have numbers for others as well. But with all of this, this body, this committee, has the ability to show students that you care about their success in these student success opportunities, as well as keeping tuition and fees low. And you can do this by providing additional tuition or additional funding for the CSU in the $95 million. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay. Well, I think I Oh, Mr. Jang. Yeah.
I was just going to ask if the CSSA representative could forward any information to our offices that would be helpful for this deliberation. Would appreciate that.
Clearly, before I make my last comment, let me ask, I understand that Cal State Dominguez Hills is currently considering a student fee. Where is that campus in the process?
There was a proposal that was submitted to the chancellor for his review, and he's currently reviewing it.
All right. Well, I understand that this is that there's no one that can claim that to ride the righteous horse here. Clearly, the campuses responded to a desperate situation where state funding had dramatically been cut. But now, we in the legislature, and especially this subcommittee, recognizes that, and we want to make it a priority to increase and restore funding for our public higher education segments. But we have to, I can't make it any clearer. At least this subcommittee is very concerned that, in exchange for restoring funding, that we, acknowledge and uphold the integrity of the basic principle that the increased state funding is to be based on the promise that tuitions not increase. It's a benchmark commitment that I believe many members of this legislature voted with the understanding that if we support increasing funding, restoring funding for public higher education, that is based on the promise that tuition be frozen. And so, but the CSSA representative made the important point that even many students are willing and apparently able to pay more, to tax themselves, in her words, to preserve the quality of education that they're receiving. I just like to say that in discussions, at least with the Assembly Democratic Caucus, and our efforts to fight for more money than what the governor has proposed in the January budget, that any further increases, any further campus fees does not encourage us to pursue that effort. And so I'd just like to leave it with that message. Let's move on to awards for innovation in higher education. We are here for the governor's proposal to provide $50 million in general fund monies to create the awards for innovation in higher education programs. I'd like to invite representatives of the Department of Finance, LAO, Mr. Storm, Mr. Lenz from the University of California, and Mr. Troy from the California Community College Chancellor's Office. Starting with Department of Finance.
Thank you. The governor's budget includes $50 million for the awards for innovation in higher education. These innovation awards would recognize and reward University of California, California State University, and community college campuses, or groups of campuses, that take ambitious actions to more effectively use their existing resources and improve the productivity of the state's higher education system as a whole. Last year, the state enacted a set of goals intended to guide the governor's and the legislature's decisions about higher education. In short, the state should make decisions that, first, improve student access and success, second, align degrees and credentials with the state's economic, workforce, and civic needs, and third, ensure effective and efficient use of resources to increase outcomes and maintain affordability. Progress towards these goals will require action on the part of the state, the segments, and campuses, and individual priorities for each of these entities will likely vary. This proposal creates priorities for campuses that are consistent with and support progress toward the state's overarching goals. Namely, these are to increase the number of bachelor's degrees awarded, to allow students to complete degrees within 4 years after beginning higher education, and to ease transfer for students who attend the community colleges and for those who bring knowledge and skills from other experiences. Funding would be awarded next spring to the campuses that implement new instructional models that best align with the state's priorities, impact the broadest number of students, and are sustainable over time. Awards will be made by a committee chaired by the Director of Finance. Its members will include governing board members from each of the state's public education segments and appointees of the Senate Rules Committee and the Assembly Speaker. This program is different than a traditional grant program in a few important ways. First, rather than submitting a proposal that describes the actions a campus will take if it were to receive funding, this proposal requires a campus to already have taken actions in order to apply. These awards are not intended to support ongoing costs of new programs. Instead, as the Legislative Analyst's Office has indicated in its analysis, campuses should be using core resources to address the state's expectations. This program rewards those campuses that take the most ambitious steps to reorient their operations to meet the state's goals. Second, the amount of funds included in an award would not be directly linked to the costs a campus incurs to perform these actions. This eliminates an incentive for campuses to take costlier actions with the expectation that they will be reimbursed for those costs, particularly since many of the actions that we believe would make progress toward the state's priorities do not necessarily require new resources. Instead, funding is provided based on the extent to which campuses address program criteria. Campuses that are selected for awards would be required to submit an expenditure plan for approval by the selection committee. We believe this proposal responds to challenges both in how the state funds education as a whole and in how the segments are governed. Because the budget separately funds K-12 schools, the community colleges, the UC, and the CSU, these segments do not necessarily have a fiscal incentive to integrate their efforts to ensure efficient use of the state's resources. For example, lower division college courses are offered in each of the segments, including in K-12 through advanced placement and international baccalaureate courses and other means. However, when a student transfers between systems or to one of the universities, that student may be required to take a nearly identical course, depending on the program requirements at a particular campus. The administration's proposal creates an incentive for the systems to better align their efforts to reduce duplication that can be costly to the state. These awards are being made to campuses because within each of the segments, many of the decisions that impact fiscal sustainability and performance are made locally, rather than by the system-wide offices. The state and the system-wide offices have little ability to control operations at a program level, and the administration does not believe it would be wise to do so, given that campuses are best able to respond to unique conditions at the local level. The proposal encourages campus leaders to evaluate the impacts of existing policies and practices and to change those that remain in place primarily due to institutional inertia without improving student outcomes. We note that because campuses are submitting submitting proposals that describe actions that they have taken to improve productivity, these applications can be used to evaluate the actions the UC and the CSU will describe in their sustainability plans as necessary to balance their budgets moving forward. The proposal builds on the actions taken by the governor and the legislature to focus on outcomes and encourages the changes in institutional behavior necessary to advance the state goals. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, the LAO.
Thank you. As we've mentioned before, we believe that this proposal sends a poor message to the campuses by earmarking a relatively small amount of money to reward campuses for doing things that advance the state's core mission of promoting student success. It somehow implies that that's special, that campuses should get a reward for doing what they should be doing with the whole bulk of their state and tuition funding. So we have a concern about that. We also think that it fragments current improvement efforts. There are already a lot of initiatives underway. Last year, this body approved SB 195. The governor signed it. It set out 3 broad goals for higher education, state-level goals, and a mandate to develop 6 to 12 performance progress measures for these goals. Likewise, the current budget includes 8 performance measures that address state priorities, and the segments just reported on those last month for the first time. And then finally, in the current year, the universities are implementing strategies to increase access to courses through technology based on last year's technology initiative. And these initiatives haven't fully come to fruition yet. They're still being developed. The governor sidesteps these and empowers a small group to allocate new resources to individual campuses based on his priorities through this proposal. So we don't think that makes sense. Also, as the Department of Finance clarified, this isn't a typical grant program where a group proposes what they're going to do and then gets money based on what they propose. It's a reward program. And while that is heard of in other arenas, for example, we've all heard of the MacArthur Genius Awards, where individuals get recognized for what they've already done because they hold promise of doing better things in the future. It's pretty unusual for public funding where the accountability requirements really are more significant. So for these reasons, we recommend rejecting the governor's proposal and instead using the funds for specific identified state priorities. I can give you some examples of some of those that have been discussed. Last year, the universities and the community colleges, as part of the technology initiative, identified some system-wide IT enhancements that would permit students to take courses across campuses and to register more seamlessly across campuses. Those are still underway. We've just been discussing deferred maintenance needs. The state also has significant retirement liabilities that remain unaddressed. And there are continuing issues that have been discussed with tracking students wishing to transfer through the new SB 1440 pathway. So there are a number of needs already discussed that directly address student success that could be alternative uses of these funds.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Storm.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've been taking a look at this as a joint group here with UC, community colleges, and CSU, and you've heard our respective leaders talking about working jointly on a number of ways in which we could do things a little bit more innovatively, a little bit more collaboratively. So we continue to work on those sorts of endeavors. In addition, our campuses have been asked to just take a look to see what they could come up with in terms of some good innovation ideas in the event that the administration's proposal is adopted as is. And I know I could defer to my colleagues here about their specifics, but just wanted to kind of point those out that we're taking the proposal very seriously, and putting together some concepts from a campus perspective and on a statewide basis for our 3 segments.
Mr. Lenz.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. Patrick Lenz, Vice President for Budget and Capital Resources with the University of California. This is a unique proposal. There's no doubt about that, and I have a sense of where the Department of Finance, in taking a look at things like performance outcome measures, could see the benefit in the local collaboration. Clearly, I'll give you an example where we think we are doing very well as a system on our graduation rates. They vary by region, by campus, by the kind of students that we serve. And so, some collaboration between UC Riverside and CSU San Bernardino and the local community colleges to address or put together proposals that have these in mind and can focus on these 3 objectives has a lot of merit in our opinion. I think the 2 concerns that we would have is this is one-time funding, and clearly the kinds of goals that are sought here are something that we hope to continue to improve on with or without this funding, quite frankly. And then I think the other issue is the concept of it being a reward program. Given after a number of years of challenges with the individual's own budgets, that kind of collaboration to hedge your bet and invest your own resources in order to get rewarded may be a somewhat of a challenge for a lot of the local entities to try to pursue. But conceptually, I think we're incredibly supportive of the idea of this collaboration between the three segments.
Thank you. And Mr. Troy.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members. I'm Dan Troy. I'm the Vice Chancellor for Fiscal Policy at the California Community College Chancellor's Office. So certainly going third here, I would echo many of the comments of my colleagues, Mr. Lenz and Mr. Storm, in lauding the goals of the initiative. Certainly anything that fosters the creation of innovative methods, smooths out the transfer process, increases collaboration amongst the segments, supports, speeds the time to completion and degrees for students in the public system of higher education is all a good thing, and it's certainly very consistent with some of the efforts that the community colleges have undertaken over the past few years through the Student Success Initiative, the SB 1440 transfer degrees we're working very closely with CSU on, the scorecard that our system has rolled out in recent year among some other initiatives. And like my colleagues, I would encourage you to look at, as we look at the dollars in this budget, if they are indeed one-time dollars, let's be mindful of the activities that we're funding with them. If they're one-time dollars, they should be one-time activities. There should not be pressure on our institutions to continue funding activities if we're not going, in future years, if we're not going to be funded for those activities. So as you look at this proposal or any alternatives you may think of, I hope you'll keep that in mind. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So, I mean, my understanding, well, first of all, let me ask Finance, where did this idea come from?